Well, let's begin with the battle for control of value-added tax, or VAT, in Nigeria, led by the two arguably richest and most powerful states, Rivers and Lagos, against the federal government, a battle which has predictably ended up in court. It's also triggered a fierce political debate about everything from fiscal federalism and the Nigerian constitution to restructuring and the powers of the federal government. So the opening salvo in a debate which will rage for some time to come. But beyond the fight for supremacy and all the controversy that comes with it, a number of commentators have been drawing attention to much broader issues at stake here, not least the very survival of some states who, if the final judgment favors them, may not in fact be able to meet their financial obligations as a result, because they'll have less money to share. It's an extraordinary bind, isn't it? Because on the one hand, a victory for the states would give tremendous momentum to the issue of restructuring, but on the other, could adversely affect states with low economic activity. Well, for more on this, and after set of fiddly buttons, I'm joined now from Lagos by one of Nigeria's most respected constitutional, maritime and commercial lawyers, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, Senior Advocate of Nigeria and former President of the Nigerian Bar Association. Always a delight to have you, Olisa. Thank you very much indeed as you switch from one spectacle to the other. But I mean, so you and I were talking. You and I were talking earlier, and you made the point that everyone needs to tread carefully here when it comes to this issue of VAT, because the assumption seems to be that Rivers State has done something great here. But what's the bigger picture in a country where many states are financially beholden onto the federal government?
Yeah, the bigger picture is the issue of fiscal federalism. The issue is also one of governance responsibility. So just quickly on the point about Mr. Wike's case in court, I mean, I applaud him for going to court, and I think everyone whose rights are, abridged must go to court to determine whether he is right to do so. So I think Wike is in the right direction, but in looking at some of the details, it may not quite appear as if Wike's point is to get more money, then I'm not sure that that's what might happen, because VAT is about 2 trillion naira, and the federal government controls foreign. There are two aspects of that which may not be well known to people: foreign VAT and local. So foreign VAT comes from imports. The government of Nigeria controls foreign VAT. The government of Nigeria is getting about 300 billion right now. But if Wike's case succeeds, then the federal government of Nigeria's position would be, okay, we'll keep all the monies from foreign VAT, and therefore they'll be going to about 800 billion. So from that point of view on numbers, I'm not sure that that may necessarily be the point Wike is trying to drive. But if the issue is fiscal federalism, we need to control the resources in our various states and regions, then I think there's a broader issue that will play out. And in the midst of tight revenues across Nigeria, so many states are actually going to court on diverse issues. So we're going to see, I've christened it the tax revenue wars that we're now seeing. One is coming up in the Supreme Court on the 4th of October, and I'm part of that one. But what may be interesting is that it may lead to more accountability, because I see that in the first quarter of next year, a lot of states, if the VAT thing is broken down into 37 VAT regimes, including the FCT, a lot of states will realize that they're not getting as much, and there might be a need to launch new tax regimes. Inheritance tax is a very big possibility. Capital gains tax is another big possibility. Now, with all these new taxes coming out, I suspect that we, the affected directly might demand more accountability. And that would be marvelous if for the first time in Nigeria, we would have voters knowing that they are paying so much for governance and they're getting bad government, might then say, you know what, this time around, we're going to make sure that the right people who we want to lead us get into office. So there's a lot that might play out from Mr. Wike's endeavors in Port Harcourt.
And there's a lot of very interesting things that you've said there, Dr. Agbakoba. One of them that caught my attention is the issue of tax wars. I mean, we'll take them one after the other, because you also talked about, the foreign VAT versus local VAT, all of that. Really very interesting stuff. But you talked about tax wars. On the face of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert, but it seems like the states are locked in a battle already with the federal government on several fronts, from VAT to PIA, from NNPC to stamp duty, amid fears, as you correctly pointed out, amid fears of exclusion as a result of dwindling revenues. What do you make of all of that?
Right. Well, again, it will be for the courts to decide. That's the way I see it. I'm not sure on whose side all these issues will end up in the Supreme Court, but I'm not sure on whose side, the issues will fall on what particular tax regime. But I think the important point is if the politicians will realize that in the face of dwindling resources, it's time for them to learn some lessons, new ways of doing things. Because all the states are going to have less revenue. Less revenue will mean that you can't afford to have large governments. In 2012, Mr. Rosoya issued a report to limit the size of the federal government. So now that the resources are scarce, I would presume that many states will be looking at offloading and limiting public service, making it smaller. And that's why I said the component of good governance might creep in. So it's all going to be, a series of musical chairs. And I think it's extremely good for democracy, absolutely good. Because for the first time, you might have the voice of the voter playing a role. And that's what excites me.
No, you most definitely have a point there, but we always tend to look at things from both sides. Because if you look at, for example, the effect of climate change, it's made people from the northern part of Nigeria, quite a lot of the people who depend on sort of vegetation and all of that, to move south, and it's creating tensions between farmers and herders. And I'm wondering if this dwindling resource that you're talking about, whether all that is leading to a more rapacious, predacious disposition on the part of the states or the federal government, or both, where they're going to grab as much as possible of this dwindling resource? Or are we, on the other hand, seeing restructuring by a less sort of formal method?
That's the point. Restructuring by a less formal method. All the issues about the constitutional conference, TV appearances might seem not to have worked. So Mr. Wike has unleashed a new threshold whereby, without realizing the implications, we are now beginning to see exactly what Nigerians have called for. The need to rebalance the federation. The need for the federal government to give up a lot of its responsibilities and legislative powers. The need for the states to generate more IGR. The need for creativity. This is no longer a time to go to Abuja every month and collect an envelope. Everyone has to think. So in that thinking, it will lead to, in my estimation, and hope, better leadership. But you are right. Another potential consequence will be a clash of arms. So you will have the various states fighting each other. Already there is some sort of division amongst the states in respect of whether Mr. Wike's action in court was right or not right. Some states seem to prefer to have centralized, VATing systems. Lagos has joined Mr. in the no central VAT effort. So I'm not sure where this is all going to fall. But it calls for Nigerian politicians to be extremely cautious and prudent and patriotic and put Nigerians first. So if this leads, and I hope, if this leads to a situation where we can have diminished governments that collect taxes in our favor, that will be the most brilliant outcome of Mr. Wike's endeavors.
The point, of course, and we've got less than a minute before we take a break, but we'll come back and keep chatting, is that prudence is not a word that's normally associated with Nigerian politicians, and you've been on the fighting end against various both military and civilian politicians. Let me call them that, because a lot of the military were in fact politicians, and I bet you could tell a few stories there.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. But it's just something that I do wish would happen. I mean, I think Nigeria has had its own fair share in its 60-something odd years of independence, of generally bad governance. I think it's time we needed a break. And I'm just praying that this might just be the break. Just new thinking, creative thinking, to do things in different ways. That's all we need.
Okay, so well, stay with us. We'll come back and chat with you some more, because it's always very interesting tapping into your enormous experience there. You're watching the Arise interview, plenty more still ahead, as we continue our chat with the former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, Dr. Olisa Agbakoba. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyegolu. Now let's continue our chat with Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, former President of the Nigerian Bar Association, and one of Nigeria's most respected constitutional, maritime and commercial lawyers. Our focus is, of course, on the titanic supremacy battle that's underway in Nigeria between the might of the federal government and the collective clout of the states over who has the right to collect VAT. So far, a court judgment has favored the states, but given the fact that many of them could be hit hard and could end up facing a fiscal crisis as a result, how wise is it to continue on this path? On the other hand, there are potentially bigger and broader issues at stake here about restructuring and the future of Nigeria. And this could be the opportunity to set the course for this country in that direction or not. And Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, commercial and maritime lawyer, senior advocate of Nigeria and former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, is still with me from Lagos. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. For people like you who've been advocates and protagonists of restructuring, but none of your efforts have so far yielded any results, do you find the court judgment in Port Harcourt that favored Rivers State on the VAT question to be revolutionary? And does that inspire you to want to pursue restructuring perhaps through another method such as the courts? Because that decision has led to the passage of laws by state houses of assembly to end the authority of the federal government in at least one respect.
No, absolutely. But I just need to point out that I'm not quite on the same page as the proponents of restructuring. And I think I've had, to be told off by people like Aya Adebanjo, the leader of Afenifere, because I said the restructuring debate is, in my view, too combative. And it's not gone down well, whether we like it or not, with our northern brothers. And there's no way we can clap our hands alone. So I've always advocated rebalancing. I don't use the word restructuring. I use the word rebalancing because it's the same thing. And I've always advocated a creative application of the legislative lists by the governors. Because, believe it or not, there are actually a lot of powers that the governors have in the concurrent list to restructure their own regions. For instance, they have the ability to create electrical powerhouses, and there's a lot that they can do. So what I have advocated, and my friend Mr. Femi Falana SAN also wrote a very brilliant article on this point when he presented a speech at the inauguration of Mr. Rotimi Akeredolu, governor of Ondo State, that there are lots of ways that we can do this. So when Mr. Wike went to court, I didn't know it will reach this dimension. But I'm so pleased that it has opened our eyes to the possibility that there is another method other than this, very challenging word of restructuring. The point is we want to get to the bridge. And whether we get there by restructuring or rebalancing, the thing is that the federal government's centrifugal powers in the Constitution is far too much, and we need to distribute it. So if Mr. Wike wins, for instance, because I don't know what will happen, it's in the Court of Appeal, but let us assume for a moment that he wins his case in the Supreme Court. That is restructuring. And then I hope that other states, and even the federal government itself, so it cuts both ways. For instance, the federal government might decide that the answer to Mr. Wike's case is to say, yes, we accept that VAT is for the states, but we will not allow you to collect foreign VAT, because we were collecting 15% of VAT. Now that you say we should not collect for you, we will now take 800 billion. And that's it. So it's going to cut both ways. And I want all the states, I want all the political leaders, 36 state governors, the president of Nigeria, to be involved in this new debate, this new scramble for rearranging Nigeria. That's what we want to see. And let's see how far it goes. So long as it's done in a civil way, without rancor, and we get to where we wanted to get, whether it's the proponents of restructure or people like me who talk about rebalancing, the point is we want a new Nigeria that works. That's what we want, an efficient, lean government that cuts back on what it's consuming so that a lot of money is left for development, hospitals, schools, road, infrastructure. That's what we want to see, a new Nigeria. So I hope that this is the beginning of a new dawn.
Well, absolutely. But before we get to that new dawn, there's quite a number of paths to negotiate. And one of them that you mentioned there is the issue of foreign VAT. You talked about the possibility that the federal government may decide that they won't share their foreign VAT with the states. I mean, if that becomes the case, what are the implications of that?
Oh, well, they would say, Mr. Wike, you started the war, so we now accept the decision of the High Court of Rivers, Federal High Court in Port Harcourt. We accept it. And what it implies is that your case is that we shouldn't collect VAT. Okay, no problem. Then we will keep the foreign VAT. That's all. So what I'm saying is going to unleash a new struggle for legislative power. And so long as it's done peacefully, it's great. Let the federal government reduce its powers, because if Mr. Wike proves to be right, then the whole burden of tax collection, VAT collection, will be lifted from the shoulders of the federal government. And all 36 state governors will be responsible for collecting their VAT. So that is one responsibility less on the part of the federal government. Then there are other kinds of things that the federal government should give up. Marriage, giving out marriage certificates, driver's licenses. These are things that the federal government should not be doing. It's for the local government. So if this will lead to an avalanche of devolved power from the federal to the state to the local, then it will be all good for everybody. What we are looking out for is an efficient system of governance. And I just pray that this process leads to that.
Right. Now let's talk about the judiciary, which you are obviously in some ways much more related to. The issue of funding, because I mean that seems to be another area where the states and the federal government are bucking heads. The FG saying that, saying states must do sort of capital and recurrent. How do you see all that?
I think the problem is from the nature of the Constitution. It's not very clear who does what, but what is clear in the Constitution is that the federal government, well, the other problem is conceptually, whether the federal government is the same as the government of Nigeria. Because Professor Wabeze argues that the federal government is the lesser entity, that the federal government is just one arm of the National Assembly and the federal judiciary, and that the central government, the government of the federation, is a bigger entity. So all of these conflicts are things that I hope that the constitutional review process will resolve. But on the issue of funding, honestly, I think the current constitutional discussion should make it very clear what it is that the Constitution, not government, because I think that for the judiciary, their funding should be guaranteed by the Constitution. Right now, what is clearly guaranteed in Section 84, subsection 7 of the Constitution is the remuneration and salaries of judges. But I'd like to see capital expenditure and remuneration all properly guaranteed in the Constitution and subject to no other authority than the NJC. In that way, the judges are free of political interference from any government, whether the state or the federal. So one of the issues that will come up on October 4, because the 36 state governors have taken the federal government to court on this, is quite what should the federal government do in relation to funding. The state governors say that the federal government's responsibility is to fund state and, capital and recurrent. But the federal government seems to say, no, we should only fund our federal court. So it's all mixed up, and we'll wait to see what happens from that decision.
Right. We'll have to watch and see what happens. Dr. Olisa Agbakoba, former president of the Nigerian Bar Association, senior advocate of Nigeria, always an absolute delight talking with you. Thank you very much indeed.